violations of transitivity religion, either because they use wrong methods or because their data, when you analyze them the right way, actually are perfectly consistent with transitivity. So that's what these citations here are about. So that was kind of a big deal, but we didn't really like the idea of requiring preferences to be complete. So complete preference means that if I give you A versus B, you actually prefer one of the two. Well, that's a lot to ask. Maybe you don't have a preference among the two. So we also wanted to test transitivity without that additional requirement. So if you make choices consistent with the utility function, that's not necessarily one-to-one. You prefer A to B if and only if A has a higher utility than B. But you could have two things have the same utility. Then the linear ordering model wouldn't make much sense. So we're going to require asymmetry. If the utility of A is better than that of B, we can't have the opposite code as well. And we have negative transitivity. If the utility of A is not bigger than that of B, that of B is not bigger than that of C, then that of A is not bigger than that of C. So these are the two mathematical axioms that we test. And that just means that preferences are consistent with a strict weak order. So we constructed a polytope again. We figured out for 5 choice alternatives what are all the possible weak orders. We gave people choices between lotteries, but they could either say, I prefer this lottery or that lottery, or they could click on the pan balance to indicate that they had no preference, or they were indifferent between the two. We also gave them incentives. We told them that one of their choices would be paid for real later, and if they picked the pan balance, we would choose for them which one that they would get. So they had an incentive to tell us what preference they have if they have a preference. Because chances were that might be the one they get for real payment at the end of the experiment. So I can't show you pictures of this, but for 5 lotteries, there are 541 distinct weak orders. We now have a polytope in 20-dimensional space. So it has 541 vertices. I had shown you earlier 6 vertices for linear order. So here we now have 541 vertices. We ran a public domain software called Porta to get the facet-defined inequalities that ran for 3 months, and we got lucky. It actually completed because these are computationally expensive problems. Chances are you run the program and even your descendants don't get the result. But we were lucky. After 3 months, we didn't get the answer. And so Porta gave us 75,834 facet-defined inequalities. So this is the simplest, non-trivial description of this polytope. You cannot simplify it, and there's nothing redundant in the description. So the paper we wrote has a 2,000-page online supplement with 75,000 linear inequalities with all the constraints of the model. And it's a very, very small thing, if that makes sense, in 20-dimensional space to talk about that. But so we're dealing with trinomial probabilities. If you take all vectors of trinomials that are imaginable, only 0.05% of them lie in the polytope. So it's a very, very restrictive model. Certainly for the social sciences, a very restrictive model. And we used all the constraints of inference to test that. And it turns out that we had extremely good performance. Very, very many of our data sets were right in the polytope where you didn't even need to do a statistical test. And many of them were so close to the polytope, actually virtually all, with the exception of one participant, they were all perfectly consistent with the polytope, either because they were inside or statistically compatible with the polytope. And so I think it's time to wrap it up. So I have covered a lot of ground. I started with reasoning fallacies. So the most common, some of the most common methods used in behavioral decision research. And if you read papers that use this, you should be wary of the conclusions. They either count how many correct predictions they make, where they aggregate over all kinds of things that you cannot really aggregate over, or they count multiple choice across people, which also doesn't make a lot of sense when people are allowed to differ in their preferences. Or they do this strange thing with the significant effects that they count up and say, oh, well, the more studies, the more predictions we made, the more we got evidence in favor of our theory. And someone else even replicated the study, and now we have even more evidence in favor of it. But the replication did not add evidence. At best, it just showed how limited the evidence at best can be. So replication preferences are probabilistic themselves, which I find a lot more plausible. Of course, the most plausible model is a combination of the two. You're not sure about what you prefer, you kind of fluctuate, sometimes you're a little bit more willing to take a risk, sometimes you're a little less willing, and on top of it, occasionally you make mistakes, you pick something you actually didn't mean to do. So there would be hybrids of the kinds of models I've talked about. This allows us to test various kinds of numerical and non-numerical theories, including heuristics, and it solves the really complicated conceptual, mathematical, and statistical challenges that decision research or space, rather than using those methods, the probability models that I went through a little bit fast, solve those problems. I also put an emphasis on very general models. I explained a few times how common models in econometrics are special cases of the kinds of models I talked about. So basically the philosophy behind that is that I'm trained more or less like a pure mathematician to the extent that I am a knowledgeable mathematician. But my background is more like pure mathematicians in that I don't want to assume something I don't have to assume. And so the models very much emphasize making as few assumptions as possible to accomplish a particular scientific goal. And we have a software package. In psychology, not very many people are mathematically very savvy. So expecting psychologists to adopt mathematical models is really not realistic. So we decided that we would generate a software package with the graphical user interface where they can take their theory, they fill in all the possible preferences you can have, and then the software package creates the polytopes, looks for facets, runs the other constraints, statistical analysis, and they don't have to know the mathematics and the statistics that are at play to analyze the data. But of course, depending on the polytope, they might start the software and it will never return anything. We have worked about that. And that's it. Thanks.
Are there any questions? What was a garbage non-transitivity thing that?
Okay, so one thing that some papers did that I found really funny was they would they would ask people to make a bunch of pairwise comparisons. Then they would run some complicated software program that I'm sure was a lot of work to program to count how many cycles they could find. How many instances were there where somebody picked A over B in one decision and then B over C in some other decision and C over A in another decision. And they counted up all the cycles. Cycles of like 3, 4, 5. They counted how many cycles of any form they could find. And then they called that the index of intransitivity. But you can very easily construct a scenario where if you might have 1,000 cycles, and all you need to do is flip one pair, and they all go away all at once. So if you had just made the mistake once in one pair, suddenly the degree of intransitivity of 1,000 would go to 0 with one single pairwise choice that flips around. And they are not taking that into account. So just counting cycles blindly was a very bad idea.
So pairwise comparisons might be like food or something.
Yeah, I mean, so the examples I have with choices between lotteries, but examples, for example, in biology, they might have different food sources and they see how often a bird flies to one place to feed, or how often a bee flies to one flower rather than the other flower to pollinate, all kinds of things. I mean, there are many, many different kinds of tasks that people have used to test transitivity. But a lot of these are very difficult to run, so doing the experiments is a lot of work, and I think oftentimes they underestimate the math and statistics work they have to put into it to actually run a test that's actually testing transitivity. I think many scholars, because they come from other disciplines, they get kind of as a long-term relative frequency would be a different interpretation of the probability.
The point is that I would think very hard that I would do something, and that would happen once.
Yeah.
Just once.
Mm-hmm.
And I am quite sure how to put me at that time making this decision in that moment.
So let's say you only pick, to connect it back to the top, just to make it as concrete as we can make it. Let's say I only offer you one single lottery, once.
Yes.
Okay, you could still, if you satisfy cumulative prospect theory, you could still be unsure how to weigh the probabilities. You could be unsure how exactly to weigh the different outcomes, whether a big outcome is that much more, what's the marginal extra value or an extra $100. You could be uncertain about these, and when you make your choice, this could be the outcome of a probabilistic process. For example, very, very simplistic, and I don't claim to be a neuroscientist, you could have different neural pathways in your brain compete against each other. You might have your prefrontal cortex that's very trying to trade off against things. It might compete against your gut feeling, oh wow, I want to go for the one with $1 million, even though it's probably not going to happen, but maybe it's my lucky day. You could have some kind of probabilistic competition in your brain between different networks of your brain, and that would be the probability story behind it. I don't know. I mean, I'm just making something up to make it plausible why that